Since 1954, Americans have been arguing about the Johnson Amendment. What is it? Where did it come from? And what does it mean today? And why is it still here? Recent news reports covering a 2024 complaint filed by 4 religious nonprofit groups against the Johnson Amendment have resulted in a tidal wave of confusion. If you go to church or synagogue or participate in any nonprofit activities or give any donations to charity, this legal debate will impact you. And if you care about the God-given rights of conscience, free speech, and religious liberty, this conversation is critical. The Johnson Amendment and you, today on The Public Square.
So now you know the topic, and it's going to be a good one today on The Public Square. Welcome, everyone. I'm Wayne Shepherd with Dave Zanotti. The team today is Rob Walgate, Melody Elsey, and, of course, Alan C. Duncan, whose voice opened the program today. And let's get started, Dave.
Wayne, this has been something we've been working on for 25 years. And the reason that we have been working on it that long is because one day we got a letter from the IRS explaining to us that our tax-exempt status, which began back in 1980, had been revoked by the Internal Revenue Service. And it was revoked because of something that was published in a voter's guide that we put out at that time. That's the term the IRS used. We've always called it voting information. All right? Mm-hmm. And so they claimed that we had attempted to reconstruct, influence, somehow get involved in trying to control the outcome of the presidential campaign, which I thought was quite intriguing. So this is now when you get the letter, by the way, it's ready, fire, aim. It's not, please come and visit with us. We have a question about. It is your status is now revoked, period.
We're on to the appeals process.
If you have any questions, here's who to contact. And so, of course, we had to hire up some of the best lawyers in the land. Fortunately, they were already friends of ours, and we were already in a relationship with an outstanding law firm in D.C. That had former IRS people working there in their nonprofits division. And so we had to go through the very lengthy process of challenging the IRS, going to court with the IRS, winning our appeal to the IRS and being reinstated. Now, here's the irony of the whole thing. After hours and hours of back and forth across the table with their lawyers and our lawyers and all this sort of stuff, hours of it, it came down to the fact that they objected to the positioning of one candidate on the page over the other, as opposed to a side-by-side positioning. And they contended that the positioning of the one over the other intimated, if you would, a form of prejudicial bias. And that if we had perhaps in half the publication switched the order, then they would have been presented in a more fair perspective. This is what it got down to. These kind of little teeny tiny nitpicky realities. After hours and hours, I ended up saying to the IRS agent, look, 2 agents, I've been to a lot of schools. And of course, they laughed because when we got into the room, the first thing that happened is this was like something out of the Matrix. We came in and they came in with files under their arms and their team. And they, across the table, there was handshaking going on in this sort of conversation. And they waited and got to me last. And when the agent reached out to shake his hand, at the same time, he patted a file that was at least 1 foot tall. He patted the file and said, Mr. Zanotti, it's so nice to meet you. I've been reading so much about you. I was waiting for Mr. Anderson. I thought they were literally going to pin me against the wall. I mean, it was everything. It looked just like the movie The Matrix. Point is, we've been on this subject for 20 years, 25 years. And as a public policy organization, we go back to the Constitution, the Declaration, and what does the law say? This is not a game. This is real. This is about your civil rights.
I think it also shows where we're at kind of, though, as a country. If it was based upon placement of pictures, we get offended so easily in this country anymore. We get offended like something makes us mad or draws the attention by the placement of pictures. and where they were? Like that's what they have to dig into. They're telling you how you felt by placing those pictures on the specific page.
What you're describing happened more than 2 decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
The sensitivities have only gotten worse in the last 2.5 decades.
Yes.
Well, and we won, right? I mean,
we won.
Yeah. So less than anyone is.
Yes, and what ended up happening was we didn't have to go any farther into IRS court with them because they recognized that
ridiculous.
And so you say, well, and then the debriefing with the lawyers, why would they attempt on such a case such as this? And the lawyer said, simple, you're having a significant impact in reaching people with voting information, and they don't like that. It's about control.
Who's they?
The IRS and the political administrations. The political parties and the powers in Washington, D.C. do not like independent, non-party controlled communications going out where voters start to think for themselves, think outside the box, and they're doing it with nonprofit dollars. They're doing it out of the nobility of saying we just want free speech and we want better elections. They don't like that. They can't control it.
Do you think someone called them and tipped them off and
That's
said,
the second thing they said. You probably have ticked off enough people because some elections have changed and they got to blame somebody, so they're blaming you.
But for clarification, the voters' information that we have always put out has been nonpartisan. We have not used it as a tool for endorsements or
Ever.
even suggested that this slate is who you should vote for. It's always been nonpartisan.
We get people frustrated with us that we don't tell them who to vote for. Look, I'm wearing my iVoters t-shirt today, Rob. Yeah, it's ridiculous that would be the charge levied against this organization when it's not what we do.
That event inspired iVoters.com. At that stage in the game, that we had different names for the publications we were doing. It was then, and even earlier than that, we decided that while in 1986 the word voter's guide was something that we helped pioneer in the marketplace. In fact, it started in 1980. We dropped that terminology because we never wanted to be accused in any way, shape, or form of attempting to guide someone into making a decision.
Because it wasn't what you were doing anyway.
No, it was like the phone book. It was like, here's all the information, make up your own mind. But people would see the word guide and they would go against it. That's why we divorced ourselves from that terminology and always have. We don't want that terminology to be to any way connected. So we went to iVoters.com. And what does iVoters.com mean? Anything you want it to mean.
Do you find it interesting, maybe not funny, that some of the most time you've spent in a courtroom has been because of our nonpartisan voter information services?
Yes.
Think about that.
We've been the whole way to the Supreme Court on a number of cases in the state and federal level. We've been in court. We're constantly in court. In fact, there was a time when someone actually sent us a letter and said, you all are spending too much time teaching first principles and doing all the stuff on the public square. You should dedicate your time solely to religious liberty issues in the courts. And the person said that this was their advice to us. And I had to laugh out loud because I said, if this person only recognized how much time we spend in courtrooms fighting for religious liberty and free speech, we just don't profile our organization as doing just that, because here's the problem. If the judges and the lawyers don't know the first principles of how the government's supposed to work, what difference does it make if you're in court? You can't win anyhow because you're not even speaking the same language. It's a both and struggle.
I'm just sitting here thinking of the lawyer meetings I've been in with you, with Melanie, with the team, or seeing you in action in court over 20 years ago. In the Mega Millions case, I think that was the first time we joined forces in a courtroom.
Yeah. Well, and the number of depositions. We've been the number of depositions and the difficulty of that.
That was one of my first. I did a deposition over the phone, and I felt like the whole time I was like, I need to talk to counsel privately. I need to talk to.
Yeah, depositions are not your best day. All right, and we've been there a lot of times. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the Johnson Amendment. And in a few minutes, we're going to take the time to actually roll a video. You're going to get to hear the audio, and it's well enough written that it'll carry just fine. You're going to get to hear the audio of something that we did, was it 7 or 8 years ago?
I think it's 2017.
All right. So it was however much time it was, that's when we started it, in which we were again visiting this debate. Now, what is the Johnson Amendment? You'll hear that in just a little bit more. But right now, the current debate in our shop is whether it's 30 or 31 words. This is how nitpicky we get when it comes to matters of law. You don't want – and Wayne, here's something else we've discovered over time. We don't know everything. We know we don't know much at all. But what we do know, we try to learn well. Yeah. And so oftentimes when we bring a case to litigators, we have to write the case. We have to do the moot courts. We have to, because we're bringing to them an arena of law that they're not regularly practicing and that there aren't lots of cases on. So we sort of enter into it humbly together. So right now we're having a debate in our shop. The Johnson Amendment originally was started in 1954. That's when it actually happened. You'll hear that story in just a minute. But it's been amended. So some of us think it has 30 words. Some of us contend it has 31 words. And so we turn to the referee of the public square. The Johnson Amendment in the Internal Revenue Code, Melanie Elsey, has how many words?
In the congressional record, originally it's 30. I counted it 4 times, and I know how to count up to 30.
I rest my case.
But it was amended
Oh.
in the mid-'80s. And so the language now considered to be the Johnson Amendment is the amended language, and it is 31 words. So it's, you give and take words and you end up with an aggregate number.
Glad we cleared that up.
So you're both right.
Yeah. So let's just, to get started, what does the Johnson Amendment read?
You want the original or you want the...
Give me the original. I like the 30-word version.
Well,
Okay.
Don't we need to know what we're dealing with now, though? I kind of want the new version.
All right.
Quote, and which does not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distributing of statements, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office.
There you have it. Now we know what it is. Let's talk about it next on the Public Square when we come back in just a moment.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Back with you on the Public Square today as we talk about the Johnson Amendment. And now you know what it is. And by the way, can we go all the way back to that IRS meeting and that stack of that foot-high stack about Ute? Do we have access to that, Dave? Could we read that?
Oh, it's I'm sure it's public record. Yeah, I don't know if the IRS is willing to share, but
that
it's
would
gotta
make
be,
interesting reading.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, let's get serious here. Let's go after this topic today. Now, we're going to hear a YouTube video that a much younger Rob Walgate and much younger Alan C. Duncan put together, right?
That's right. It takes about 7 minutes, and it gives a really good background on how we got into this conversation about federal taxation, the IRS, and what nonprofits can and cannot say in regards to free speech.
Writing about his 1831 visit to the United States, Alexis de Tocqueville said, "Americans grouped together to hold fates, found seminaries, build inns, construct churches, distribute books. I have frequently admired the endless skill with which the inhabitants of the United States managed to set a common aim to the efforts of a great number of men and to persuade them to pursue it voluntarily."
The history of charitable organizations in America is a long one. From fire departments, orphanages, hospitals, and houses of worship, this country's citizens have come together voluntarily to help one another.
As early as the Tariff Acts of 1894 and 1909, we were putting down in writing that groups organized for charitable purposes shouldn't have to pay taxes.
But have we forgotten this ethic?
We're in a time when all 501c3 organizations under the watchful eye of the IRS face loss of their tax-exempt status if they dare speak out about a political candidate.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To figure out how we got here, let's take a look at the history of the federal income tax.
Well, you're telling me the federal income tax has a history. It hasn't always been with us?
It certainly feels like that. But the federal income tax is a fairly modern institution. In 1861, the first year of the Civil War, our nation's first official federal income tax was levied. It began as a flat rate of 3% on incomes higher than $800, which is about $21,000 in today's money.
But Congress voted to let that income tax expire in 1872.
which means by that point in time, since the ratification of our Constitution in 1787, a federal income tax was only levied for a temporary 12-year period.
Now fast forward to 1913. It was an eventful year in America. Camel introduced the first packaged cigarettes.
The first modern crossword puzzle appeared in print.
Rosa Parks, Vince Lombardi, Jesse Owens, and Bear Bryant were all born.
Houndstooth.
Yeah, lots of houndstooth.
The Brooklyn Dodgers moved into their new stadium, Ebbets Field. The Philadelphia Athletics beat the New York Giants in the World Series.
And the Wright brothers' new Model E was soaring over Huffman Prairie.
But those weren't the only notable things to happen in 1913. That same year, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted. That was big news then, and it's still big news today.
The amendment reads, Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. Again, Congress now has the power to levy an income tax.
This paved the way for the Revenue Act of 1913, which reimposed the federal income tax, and this was signed into law by Woodrow Wilson. But what might come as a surprise is the rate of the tax.
That's right. In fact, if you were making up to $4,000 a year and you were filing jointly, and $4,000 is roughly $100,000 in today's money, you paid exactly $0 in federal income tax. Now, this Revenue Act of 1913 had in it language that related to those tax-exempt organizations, and this language echoed words that had been around since those tariff acts that we talked about earlier. And this language said, quote, "Nothing herein contained shall apply to corporations, companies, or associations organized and conducted solely for charitable, religious, or educational purposes." Again, don't tax these folks.
This finally codified the long-standing tradition that voluntary charitable organizations of all types filled a unique role in society, one that government does not.
And in a sense, it was a legal admission that government didn't have a birthright to tax churches and charities. Nonprofits remained free to do what they do, even if that meant that they felt compelled to speak out about a political candidate every once in a while.
And it's not exactly easy to become a nonprofit organization.
No.
There's paperwork involved. You have to make an application to the federal government. You have to be recognized with a mission and a statement and become a trust. The public has to trust you in what you're doing. But in 1954, to remain tax exempt, nonprofits were forced to give up a portion of their constitutional rights. Lyndon B. Johnson, a senator from Texas, was running for re-election, and a group, a nonprofit group, a 501c3, not a church, had come out in support of Johnson's political opponent, and his name was
Dudley Doherty.
Dudley Doherty. Well, Johnson, then the Democrat minority leader, shot back by introducing language to amend part of the federal tax code. This language, known as the Johnson Amendment, is still in effect today. It's 31 words, and it reads that these groups not participate in or intervene in,
including the publishing or distributing of statements,
any political campaign on behalf
or in opposition to
any candidate for public office.
There's also no record of anyone ever debating this amendment.
This means the ACLU, NPR, TED Talks, the local YMCA, Red Cross, United Way, and countless other nonprofits, churches, mosques, synagogues all around the country can't speak out for or against a political candidate.
But now some people might be asking, Rob, wasn't there a recent executive order about this? I mean, shouldn't this all be taken care of by now?
More words will not fix this problem. The Johnson Amendment is 31 words in length. That's all. The way to fix the problem is to repeal those 31 words, take them out of code, and allow all nonprofits to have their right to free speech.
Well, it's very helpful to hear from Rob and Alan. That was recorded for YouTube a number of years ago, and Alan, it's still available, isn't it?
Yes, that's on our Public Square YouTube page. And we'll put it in the show notes if people are listening to this in some sort of an online format. We'll have it in the show notes. But type in 31 words, the Johnson Amendment, the Public Square, and you can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
But I'll talk about the original 30.
Yeah, do we need to change the title of the video? I don't know.
No, you're good. You're more accurate, all right? And I call those 30 vengeance words. 30 vengeance words. Lyndon Baines Johnson was angry because some people were challenging him in his Senate race. And he went to the IRS and basically went to the Congress and said, I want this in the IRS code. It was placed in, based on his recommendation, it was placed in the law, voted on and approved without hearings, without testimony. And it's Lyndon Baines Johnson vengeance against nonprofits. To this day, it was completely inappropriate.
So that's 71 years ago, right? 1954. So the Club of 100 was still active and working with a vengeance even then.
Well, think about it. LBJ. I mean, if you read Robert Caro's monumental works, I haven't read all of it, but if you study Robert Caro's lifetime works about LBJ, you know this was not something that that was not foreign to him.
This was a guy who liked to grab dogs by the ears when the cameras were around.
Yeah. He would leverage his political power and his influence quite heavily to get what he wanted.
Yeah.
He was well known for that.
And this is 54, so this is a Democrat Johnson who then gets a Republican Eisenhower to go along with him on the final version of the bill as well.
Well, because the Club of 100, they will stick together if they're protecting each other. And that was the goal, right? To protect each other.
And there was no debate?
No debate.
No, what they did was they amended the Revenue Act of 1954 in the final stage of passing. So all the hearings were already finished. They amended it on the floor so that there were no public hearings. There was not one single page of public testimony on this amendment.
So what has it turned into? It's turned into a way for the IRS to stop people who are employed or engaged in the activity of not-for-profit services from speaking out their free speech, their conscience, and their mind in regards to ballot issues, general issues, that in some way might be interpreted as impacting an election, candidates, and general elections. There is a pale, there is a shadow over the conscience of people who are in the arena, over the right to conscience and right to free speech and right to assembly and right to free exercise. All of those things our Constitution protects unless you work for a nonprofit. Then you have to be careful what you're going to say because, in essence, the government will strip you of your nonprofit status. Now, let's talk about the nonprofit status. Some people say, well, that's the problem. You all are addicted to tax-exempt donations. Let me tell you something. That might have been a legitimate argument 20 years ago. But since the tax reforms of 2017 are now permanent, most people no longer do charitable deductions off of their general revenue in their tax filing. Now the standard deduction is so high that where most people do their giving doesn't even apply anymore, so they're not itemizing. So that's not even the point. The point is that from the beginning, as this video aptly discussed, the notion that there are people who do nonprofit work of service have the right to raise tax-free dollars and spend those tax-free dollars. That concept has been around from the beginning, and you're presumed to be tax-exempt, whether or not you ever file with the IRS or not.
Wow, that deserves some unpacking, and this whole thing is in the news, and we'll talk about that coming up on The Public Square. You stay with us. If you have to leave us, this program is archived, of course, at thepublicsquare.com. You can also listen on YouTube on our Public Square channels. Look us up there.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
So we've gotten the background on the Johnson Amendment, and if you didn't know what it was before now you do here on the Public Square. Thanks for listening today. But it's in the news again, isn't it, Dave?
It is, and here's what's happened. There was a case filed in the Eastern District of Tennessee with 4 plaintiffs, all nonprofits, 2 nonprofit associations, 2 churches. And these 4 plaintiffs went forward and said that their basic rights were being denied by the IRS. And so by the IRS regulation and specifically by the Johnson Amendment. And so they were litigating a case against the IRS code and against the Johnson Amendment. out of that process, this could have gone a lot of different directions. Where it ended up going was to a settlement. And the latest news is that there has been a settlement reached and filed, and we've read the filing, we've read the settlement. And the settlement basically is that the IRS has moved. They offered these plaintiffs this notion that the IRS will acknowledge the fact that a church operating within its normal parameters of communication can discuss, even endorse a political candidate. That a house of worship, they don't use the term church, they use the word house of worship, which is not defined. The house of worship can, in fact, speak on these matters. That's the settlement, and the plaintiffs have agreed. Now, it's important to note that sounds like the Johnson Amendment's over. Well, no, it's not by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, it's still law, right?
The first thing is it's still law. It's still in the IRS code, placed there by the United States Congress. This particular ruling, and here's what you have to understand about the IRS. The IRS is one of the most mysterious organizations. When you think about the IRS, put on your soundtrack from The Wizard of Oz, because it is a bizarre, different world, completely different. The IRS will basically do a ruling on a case, and the ruling on a case that's in contest will then become precedent. And all the lawyers around the world that function on IRS law, that do something with IRS law, will then read the case law of the decision made by the IRS and advise their clients that this is where the IRS now stands. Now, the IRS can change their mind as many times as they want on rulings in regards to anything applying to taxes and codes. And basically, the lawyers all line up and say, do what the IRS says. Why? Because if you disagree with what the IRS says, then you have to sue the IRS to basically win your point, which now costs you X millions of dollars. The IRS has an abusive amount of power that is not being controlled by the Congress, which created the law that by which the IRS operates. Congress is the fundamental problem here. They are totally derelict in their duty. They are not paying attention. Why? Because the IRS is doing their bidding.
Does the IRS change in regards to enforcement depending who controls the White House and or the Congress?
Well,
Yep.
I remember when the Tea Parties were targeted by the IRS, and if they were filing with key language in their application to be tax exempt, if it included anything related to Tea Party or what were some of the other
There were all kinds of buzzwords that triggered the IRS's algorithm.
Right. Yeah. And conservative.
Right.
So they went after organizations that were legitimately wanting to have an impact on issues.
Right.
And
tried to silence
got
them.
caught. Yeah.
So here's this case that comes out of Texas, and we've got a settlement now. Now, the news media is all over the board, left and right. The left and right sources are all claiming completely different things about this. The Johnson Amendment has been rescinded, says the right. Massive gain for the.
I'm looking at a headline that says churches can endorse political candidates. IRS says that is not what the settlement says.
That's not at all what it says. All right. So you've got people on one side and people on the other side all making up stories about this.
Well, you said houses of worship. What about everybody else who's a nonprofit?
Oh, what about all the others like Moody Bible Institute, Moody Radio, almost all, many
Crisis pregnancy centers.
Crisis pregnancy centers. What about the YMCA, as you talked about in the video?
Schools.
What about schools and universities?
NPR?
What about NPR? Yeah, exactly.
Too soon.
Exactly. So what about all these other entities? Whether you agree with them or not, they have a nonprofit education and research role that has always been recognized as tax exempt. They filed for their paperwork, and now the government is trying to control their speech. It's that simple. It's speech control. That's a direct violation to free speech. I don't care whether I agree with the speech or not.
Well, I was just thinking, like, even the NFL was a 501c6, well, it still is, but it relinquished its tax exempt status because it took a lot of heat for that. but there is a section in code for business entities of an organization similar to that. So you're in essence would be telling them, hey, you can't participate and do this either.
And Wayne, just to connect the dots between everything that was just given as an example and your question, what about everybody else? In the settlement agreement, it states the parties request this court enter the attached proposed order enjoining defendants, the IRS, as well as their successors, agents, and employees from enforcing the Johnson Amendment against plaintiff churches. 2 churches.
2. Wow. And geographical boundaries. This doesn't apply to anything other than
Correct.
2 churches.
Man, there's a lot of misunderstanding here.
Can you
isn't there?
believe the headlines we're getting? It applies to 2. Now, what's ironic is 2 of the other plaintiffs weren't churches but were 501c3 nonprofits, and they got nothing out of the deal.
Did they think they did?
I
think everyone thinks they did. And it's kind of like the old adage when you see a speed limit sign, the speed limit's still the speed limit. You don't get pulled over for going 1 or 2 miles per hour over, but they could.
But in this case, the devil is in the details, and you have to read the details of the complaint.
Let's read some of that language and how specific, i.e. tricky, the language actually is. This is what free speech now, this is what the settlement on the Johnson Amendment looks like for these 2 churches.
Well, they're saying here that the plaintiffs asked the court to enter declaratory relief from the Johnson Amendment unconstitutionally prohibits the organizations from engaging in political speech. Again, they're still talking about just those 2 plaintiffs. Down a little bit further, the text of the Johnson Amendment may cause certain otherwise tax-exempt organizations to lose their tax-exempt status if they participate or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of or opposition to any candidate for public office.
Pretty clear.
It's pretty clear.
And in regard to what did they really win, they won a word salad of prohibitions from the IRS. You have to be in a certain place and a certain time, speaking in a certain way to a certain group of people. It's got to conform to your religious communications, to your congregants. In other words, you can say what you can say inside the 4 walls the way we say you can say it.
It all comes down to it still remains under the discretion of the judgment of the IRS. So the only way that anyone can come out publicly to say we've gotten rid of the Johnson Amendment is to actually get rid of the Johnson Amendment, to actually go through Congress to do that.
It seems like all the time we're asking, where's Congress?
Maybe we should change the name of this broadcast to Where's Congress?
I'm all for getting rid of the Johnson Amendment, but is it too far to go to say I'd be for getting rid of the federal income tax? Like that was what I took away from helping to put that video together is the federal income tax wasn't something that we even had in this country until 1913.
Nor was the 1913 amendment ever envisioned to be the labyrinth of oppression that it is today.
Yeah, what was it, like 2% or something?
Yeah, and I think you had to make, $100,000
before you even qualified.
Before you even qualified to pay the tax in today's money.
Now, we're not suggesting people shouldn't pay taxes. The scripture is clear, pay taxes where taxes are due. But the process by which taxes are used to brutalize our liberties is the problem.
All right, time for a break. And I'm tempted to say, wait, there's more, because there is. And we're going to get to it coming up on the Public Square. You stay with us.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Once again, thanks for your support of the American Policy Roundtable and this program, The Public Square. We are here because you support us, so thank you for that. We're found online at thepublicsquare.com, aproundtable.org. We're on YouTube. We're on radio stations. You'll find us all those places. All right, let's get more details on this Johnson Amendment so-called settlement that's been reached. Melanie, you've been sharing some of the details. There's more we need to know, isn't there?
Well, I think the original intent of the litigation was to restore the constitutional freedom to all nonprofits.
Right.
But that's not what happened. And even in how they laid out the parameters of the complaint itself, they didn't go that direction. From the very beginning of the filing of the complaint, they were only seeking, in their language, they were only seeking declaratory judgment to express views. They were seeking no relief from the operation of the Johnson Amendment outside of a certain context. So they weren't actually looking to get rid of the Johnson Amendment when the complaint was filed. So we can't say on the other end of the spectrum, when the consent agreement is being debated and all the language is being put on paper and what the agreement will say, that's going to be the outcome, because it just was never intended to be that outcome.
And I think the IRS picks and chooses how they want to enforce it. I mean, let's look at election time, the fall of even-numbered years. When you go in churches all across this country, you see political candidates that just happen to show up, and some are given access to the pulpit. So you're telling me that when that candidate goes behind the pulpit, that's not an endorsement from that church? I mean, is the pastor going to turn over the pulpit to anyone else they don't endorse? So I just think it's been interesting to see how the IRS has picked and choose the enforcement mechanism of the Johnson Amendment.
The point of this litigation is it does not rescind the Johnson Amendment. It doesn't touch it.
No, it does not.
It's simply as if the IRS were to be giving these two church plaintiffs a ruling, like they gave us a ruling that we had to overcome. And they gave them a ruling, and after this litigation was filed, the IRS amended their ruling for these two plaintiffs. It doesn't rescind the Johnson Amendment. It doesn't say that the IRS won't change its mind next year, that they can't. Now, it seems to say that the IRS can't ever go back and change this ever. Okay, that's what the language says. But if the IRS chooses to rule exactly the opposite one state over tomorrow, the only way for those people to gain access to this precedent is to sue and have it applied to them. So there's all kinds of trap doors in this. Furthermore, the IRS didn't move over, they just pivoted. They just changed the way they wove the web, because the way, if you read how you have to say what you're going to say within a certain context, it's got to be within your house of worship. It's got to be to your normal membership. It's got to be aligned to this and that. Who's the IRS to dictate how anyone should speak in public in a church setting to please them?
I've been reading a lot about this. I've not heard any of this perspective. I've not heard this analysis from anyone else.
And there is one more piece of the puzzle that I think is important for our listeners to understand, because President Trump is saying back in 2017, he got rid of the Johnson Amendment. He made this a public speech. I believe it was at prayer breakfast or religious broadcasters event. And he was saying that with his executive order that he issued on May 4th back in 2017, he solved the problem. But the problem with the fact that he actually did not resolve it was found in the language of his executive order. Because under the section where it's talking about respecting religious and political speech, there twice he's saying, to the extent permitted by law, the Treasury shall ensure, to the extent permitted by law, any individual, house of worship, or other organization on the basis of such individual or organization speaks or is spoken about political issues. What he's saying is, we have to go by the language of the Johnson Amendment. I'm going to respect your freedoms as long as it applies in the way that the Johnson Amendment was passed as a matter of law.
And the 30 words of vengeance were passed by the Club of 100 in the Senate for the purpose of controlling political speech outside the zone and control of the two major political parties. That's what this is about, because when you listen now to the people who are going to criticize us, they'll say, you are a nonprofit. You just want to become a funnel for billions of dollars to go directly into political campaigns. It makes me laugh out loud. As an organization, we have a C3 and a C4 organization. All right, we know the difference between what they're permitted to do. The C4 is not tax exempt. We know that. People have C3, C4s, and 927s. They have different organizations, 927, 729, whatever that is. They're different types of code portions whereby people operate in their incorporated activity so that they don't run across of the IRS. So we already know how to move and how to pivot and how to do the right thing the right way. Furthermore, for us as an organization, if the Johnson Amendment were to disappear and there were 10 billionaires standing outside the door saying, we'll give you $10 billion to start to tell people who to vote for, we would tell them, go find somebody else. Go have lunch. Because we don't tell people who to vote for because it's insulting to people.
And I think that's part of the misconception out there in the general public is they think, I've had people say to me, you work for a nonprofit, you don't pay taxes. And I say, what do you mean? And they say, I said, I pay all the same taxes you do. I said, I'm an employee of the nonprofit. It means we have a mission statement. It means we have to file paperwork. It means we have to do reports.
We are a public trust. The state can come in and bust us up if we're doing something wrong.
Yes. So there's all of those things that I don't think the general public grasps a hold of and understands the operation of it.
So this is and Wayne, to go back to your question that's still on the table, unless you do this stuff for a living for a long time, you don't know the ropes on how this works, and you don't know the motivation. Everyone's afraid of the IRS. And what they don't understand is the IRS is empowered by the Congress. The Congress is afraid of free speech in the political marketplace because they can't control it. They're afraid of churches and synagogues and religious organizations and nonprofits because they have credibility in the marketplace, because they're out to try and do education research, the common good. They're afraid that suddenly there'll be a new set of entities pop up with tax-exempt status, and billionaires will dump-load truck billions of dollars into these nonprofits, and that they will be advocacy organizations, and that the billionaires will get a tax exemption. Number one, the billionaires are going to find plenty of tax exemptions before it gets to political campaign dollars. If there is a tax-exempt status and people are permitted to have free speech, then the politicians don't control where those billions of dollars go. Into their organizations and their PACs. They lose control. And they're blaming, there's a writer for the Atlantic that did a lecture just the other day. She did a lecture on churches shouldn't get involved in, basically shut up when it comes to politics, church. That's not what you're here for.
The title, Don't Degrade Church with Politics.
Don't degrade church with politics. That's by the Atlantic. That's their official word on this. And it's written by
Elizabeth Brunig.
And we've talked about her before on the Public Square during some abortion conversations that we've had.
Elizabeth Brunig is a self-professed Democrat socialist.
But also pro-life.
Yes. All right. Congratulations. And she's thoughtful in that area. But in this area, she makes no sense at all. She's 34 years old.
35, I believe.
35 years old. Never been in a nonprofit field. Never served in a church or synagogue. Never has ever practiced in this field. And she's advising churches as to how they ought to preach in America.
Would she have said this during the 1960s in the Civil Rights Movement?
Would she what?
Would she have written this piece during the 1960s Civil Rights Movement had she been alive at that time?
Had she been alive, I was going to say.
Did you think that up all night, or you just come up with that right there? Because that's a pretty powerful question.
Well, it just seems that we pick and choose the types of political things that we want to allow churches to talk about.
And I think many of the people that say that aren't the ones involved directly in the church and don't understand the scriptures of Jesus having authority over everything. If he's going to have authority over every aspect of our lives, we got to turn it all over to him.
Absolutely. Well, and Dr. Sterling Glover, God rest his soul, when he was around this organization, he talked about tearing up his tax-exempt status in his church. Not that everyone should do that, but that's how committed he was to this. And he had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his church multiple times during the 1960s because it was something that he cared about and felt was important.
Well, her article talks about her views, but she's factually incorrect. She makes a statement, churches can now openly involve themselves in elections. That is not a true statement.
Sure.
Okay, well, it's time for another break. And at this point of the program, a few stations have to cut away. If that's the case where you're listening, we trust that you'll catch the rest of this program online at thepublicsquare.com.
Let's see, there's our tithe, food and clothing budget, taxes, all the insurance, and the car payments. Where's the line in your budget that helps pay the bill for fixing what's wrong in America? Log on today at aproundtable.org and join the growing team that's giving every month to get America back on track. Make your monthly contribution to aproundtable.org. spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
Well, this is one of those days on the public square where we're all, my mouth is open. I'm astounded at this analysis that is so right on that I totally missed just by following the media.
Wayne, it's remarkable to be in the position that we're in, and there are some things we hoped to accomplish in this broadcast. One is to make this something you can share with other people, that everyone can go ahead and say, wait a minute, there's another platform of knowledge. It's not being represented. This is important. Why is it important? It's just as important to colleges and universities and charitable organizations all across the board as it is to churches. It is the question of free speech and the exercise of religion thereof. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The free exercise clause comes into play here. If a church or any nonprofit, any American, I don't care whether you're nonprofit, for-profit, I don't care. If any American feels the compulsion in their place of business, in their house of worship, wherever they are, to speak the truth as they understand it, they should be protected by the First Amendment. If you're attending a church right now that never talks about this stuff and you wish they did, move. If you're attending a church that suddenly decides they want to talk about this a lot more and you don't like it, move. Go where your free speech rights and your conscience is best accepted. That's the way we started this country. We don't have the government come in and control what you can and cannot say. And here's the grave irony to all of this. This is so stupid. It is so stupid. The other side of this, whatever that is, the mythical side behind the IRS, behind the Congress, behind the Republican leadership, all right, because if the Republicans could fix this problem right now, they won't dare touch it. They won't dare touch it because they know you can't lose control. So here's the irony. They say free speech should be protected, but they say you people in these nonprofits shouldn't be allowed to take and spend tax-exempt money for your free speech, because you may talk about politics. The Supreme Court has already ruled that political spending is free speech.
Citizens United.
Citizens United. You can't stop a person from spending money on behalf of wanting to speak their conscience if, in fact, it's political speech. It's already protected speech. So the irony of this is the game is simple. Don't let the American public catch on with what's really going on because they may, and this is, I don't care whether you're black, white, red, green, or Martian. I don't care what your political party is. This is something everybody ought to be able to outrage their way to Congress and say, drop the 30 words. We'll handle our own free speech and our own political contributions as we wish. Leave us alone.
Well, I'm with you on that. I think when we all think about going to church in the church we attend, as you mentioned, you can find a different one if you don't like what the pastor's saying, but no one wants to see churches turn into political endorsement centers. No one's saying that. They're just saying they don't want to see their church punished for using the ability to preach from the gospel. And if that lines up with the candidate that's running for something, then to have an understanding that, hey, that all falls in line.
45 years we've been doing this. 35 years ago, our dance card calendar would be filled with churches that wanted us to come and speak on issues all throughout the year. Today, with a national radio broadcast and all the growth that the good Lord has given us through the friends and neighbors that we talk to all over America, Rob, you and I are lucky to get 3 speaking engagements
I'll have
a
2.
year.
I'll have 2 this year.
I'll have 3 this year. You have 2. Churches are terrified to talk about politics for all kinds of reasons. That's the reality on the ground. And they have every right to decide to talk about it or not. We do not condemn them for speaking or for not speaking.
If you're paying attention in the pulpit or listening to your pastor, you know what they're preaching each and every week and where they're preaching from and their biblical position on the candidates. That's why we do ivoters.com, not to tell people what to do or how to vote, so you can make a decision for yourself.
But now watch this one. So let's say that now we've got this ruling. Let's say this ruling from Texas, which applies to 2 churches in the whole country. So it doesn't touch the original language, doesn't rescind the amendment, doesn't move it. They flip the web, and now watch how the web comes get you. Now that you've got this ruling with all of these IRS regulations, how are they going to know how to enforce it except to send an IRS agent into your church to listen to that speech or to monitor your online communication to make sure that you're okay? Now, but let's take it a step farther. So let's say that the pastors get really smart and say, okay, or the rabbis or whoever this might involve, whatever cleric might be involved. All right, we're not going to say it on our online feed. We're not going to say it in our Sunday morning service. We're going to say it in our small groups or our Saturday sessions or our Sunday schools. Now you're going to have IRS agents in all of those entities monitoring your speech to make sure you flow. If you take this to its logical conclusion, it's a horrible position to be in. And the only thing that stops it is the IRS doesn't have the courage of their convictions to do what the law empowers them to do because they're afraid.
Well, so
be consistent.
Yes.
Monitor every word.
Be consistent. So does there need to be a trial case with no agreement that makes its way to the Supreme Court? Because we know how the Supreme Court would rule on the Johnson Amendment.
Excellent question.
I mean, that's what's needed? Unfortunately, maybe there needs to be someone that stands up, does it, then is prosecuted, then is held, and then we go through the judicial process and we go to the highest court.
Well, we know churches have been sanctioned.
Yes.
So
and so have nonprofits. Roll tape back to the beginning of this show.
Perfect position to get this all the way to the Supreme Court and have another Citizens United.
But wait a second.
Version.
I know some of those people up there. I've been reading their decisions for years. You know what they're likely to say?
It's a Congress problem.
It's a problem with Congress. This is a political problem. Yeah. It started with Congress. It ends with Congress. We are not going to rule on this. That's up to Congress. It could happen.
And I think that's up to all of us to talk to those people that are running for Congress and that are always talking about free speech, that are always talking about first principles. Hey, why don't you do something about this 31 words? Why don't you take care of this? Because the people that, many of the listeners and all of us applaud and cheer and say they're doing a great job. Hey, this is a part of the process. Let's get rid of those words.
Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think H.R. 1 in President Trump's first term, they did add language into that bill and took it out.
And you know why it got scuttled? Because a lot of Christian nonprofits were afraid of the political fight that would attend that matter, and they didn't want to have to slug it out. They didn't have the faith to go up against the giants. They chickened out. Now, this should matter as much to one big university in the Midwest that just seems to always use the word "the" to describe themselves.
They trademarked it.
Yeah. Because I remember when Barack Obama was running for president that he would rent the best blank band in the land to play and perform at his campaign rallies. That institution is a not-for-profit. How were they not participating in attempting to influence the outcome? Was that not an endorsement from the university itself? So you ask yourself the question, maybe they don't fit in the IRS code exactly the same as the YMCA or as the American Policy Roundtable, and they're certainly not a church, we get that, but this has the potential of restricting the speech of everyone in the nonprofit status. Those words don't belong in the code. Congress has got to take them out.
Well, I say it often on the program, but it's more true this week than ever, that this is the type of show that you need to share with others so that they have the understanding that we've all gained here today from this discussion of the Johnson Amendment. So share this program. It's easy to do. Tell people to download the free smartphone app to listen, or send them to thepublicsquare.com to listen, or YouTube. You'll find us on all those locations, and we're easily accessible right there. So share us if you would. And thanks for your support. Thanks to the team for this whole topic today and the understanding that's come from it. Thanks for listening to The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.